You are listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding. Between 2 and 6% of people have hoarding disorder, yet very few of us talk about it. Learn about the condition from me, somebody who has it, as well as academics, therapists, and other experts I interview. Find out how to support the podcast at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support. Finally, I am not a doctor, I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. Hey, how are you? Things here are okay. I am having a quiet day, which I like on a Saturday. Today, I am starting with, I'm going to call it housekeeping, but really it's a mini celebration. Then I have for you a success of the week and a weird dilemma of the week. And then I'm going to talk about a childhood story that I've completely changed my mind about. And then, as if all of that wasn't enough, I have a shout out to another podcast with a great bit of advice.
Let's start with some housekeeping.
Every Saturday, I transfer the latest podcast stats to a spreadsheet so that I've got a record of how things are going and can keep track. I have just transferred this week's stats, and as of probably a few days ago, the podcast has had, I can't quite believe it, 250,000 downloads. 250,000 downloads for me talking into a microphone and talking to interesting people about this mental health condition that nobody talks about, that clearly people do want to listen to people talking about. So the only housekeeping this week is a massive thank you and a bit of self-congratulation to me as well. I'm really pleased. It is satisfying to put in all this work and see numbers like that. So thank you. It's funny because just before episode 100 was when I hit 100,000 downloads. And now just after episode 150 is when I've hit 250,000 downloads. So it feels very auspicious. Who knows what will happen by episode 200? I'll be ruling the world by then, maybe. Let's hope not, for everybody's sake.
It's time for the success of the week and the weird dilemma of the week.
So, the purpose of my success of the week and my weird dilemma of the week. The success of the week is to give myself a little boost and to give you a bit of encouragement that we can and do make changes. And the weird dilemma of the week is there because there are so few places I can share these weird dilemmas. And I hear from you that you can relate really well to the weird dilemmas. And that feels good, I think, on both sides, that we're not the only person in the world thinking these odd things. So, my success of the week. The zip on my bag broke, and I was really annoyed. It was quite a new bag. And one of my core criteria for a shoulder bag is that it has a zip, because I live in fear of losing my car keys and indeed my house keys, but my car keys in particular. So having a zip on my handbag is a really important thing that reassures me that the car keys are a lot more likely to be where they're meant to be than if the bag doesn't have a zip and is just open and I know I'll knock it over or drop it or something. And I was trying to zip it up the other day and it got caught, the fabric from inside the bag got caught in the zip. And I was really like, oh no, I can do basic sewing, but I don't know how to replace a zip. So I've got to be really, really careful that this zip doesn't entirely break. So I was very, very gently messing about with the zip. And then the bit you hold on to came off in my hand. And I thought, there we go, the zip's broken. This bag is now useless to me. My first thought was, right, I need a new shoulder bag. But, listener, I overrode my instinct that this meant I needed a new bag. I overrode the desire to go and get a new one. I knew that it wasn't the full zip that was now useless. It was only the bit of the zip that you hold on to that had come off, and I'd resolved the fabric caught in the teeth thing. So I thought, no, my motto for the year is make do. I'm not going to buy a new bag just because of this zip. I know I have pliers. I can surely get this toggle thing back on. I had no confidence that I'd be able to find the pliers. It's exactly the kind of thing that I use once every 2 years, and therefore I'm never quite sure where they are. But past me had done me a massive favour. Past me had done like with tools, like DIY stuff, hammers, nails, screwdrivers, all that kind of thing. And all my tools were together in one bag, and I knew where this bag was. I did not know whether the pliers had made it there or not. So I went to the bag and I had a look through and I could not find the pliers. And then right at the bottom of the bag were these pliers, and they were originally for like jewelry making. So they were good for tiny little tasks, like replacing a zip toggle. Is toggle the right word? I feel like maybe it isn't. So I found the pliers. I got the bag, I got the toggle, I tried to fix it. I was very pleased with myself that past me had put the pliers with the other tools. I was very pleased with myself for looking there before going, well, I better buy new pliers, which would also often be my first thought. So I found the pliers. I tried to fix the zip. I could not get this thing back on. And the double success of the week is that I still didn't buy a new bag. What I did was think, okay, so the original toggle won't go back on, but you know what would be perfect? Would be a little keyring hoop. So I got a little keyring hoop. I put it on the zipper. There we are. I have a perfectly functioning bag again with a perfectly functioning zip. And I am really proud of myself, and that is my success of the week. For 2 possibilities to go buy new stuff, whether a bag or pliers, and I did neither. And the added bonus of past me having put the pliers with the tools, and the pliers are back with the tools now. So a whole series of successes of the week there. My weird dilemma of the week. I sometimes get supermarket deliveries. Generally, I nip to a supermarket once a week or something for fresh stuff, but then prior to COVID, every 3 or 4 weeks I would get a delivery, often of the heavy stuff, that kind of thing. Then early in COVID, it suddenly, unsurprisingly, became impossible to book a supermarket delivery. The entire country was trying to book a supermarket delivery, and I was trying every supermarket like everybody was, and none of them had any slots. People were staying up till 2 a.m. because there was a rumour that a particular supermarket launched their new dates every Thursday at 2 a.m. or something. It was ridiculous. Nobody could get a slot. And that gave me scarcity panic. And I am very familiar with scarcity panic. I get it a lot. And I was having food scarcity panic because even though we could go to the supermarket, there was a pandemic and I didn't want to. I was scared, especially early on, because we didn't know really what we were dealing with. And as well as food scarcity panic, I had also manufactured in myself supermarket delivery scarcity panic. Because I could not get one, it became all the more important to get one. And so finally, one day, by luck, I was on one of the supermarket websites at the right moment and was able to book a supermarket delivery. And when I was booking it, it said, would you like to make this a recurring slot? And I thought, yes, I would, because I can't deal with this scarcity of delivery slots. So it gave me the option of either a weekly slot or a fortnightly slot, so every 2 weeks. And I thought I definitely don't need a weekly delivery, so I booked in for a recurring fortnightly supermarket delivery slot. And that was great, and it served me well. Once a fortnight, a nice, usually man, occasionally woman, would turn up to my house and bring me groceries. Feels like the future, doesn't it? And I have kept that fortnightly slot ever since. There is no scarcity of supermarket slots these days, but I've kept the slot because when I think about, I don't really need it fortnightly. I could do with every 3 or 4 weeks, and I can top up in between. When I think that and then think, so I should probably cancel the recurring bit, the original scarcity panic kicks in with force. So I've kept the fortnightly slot, even though I don't really need the fortnightly slot. And having the fortnightly slot and having to meet a minimum order means that quite often, once I've put what I need in the basket and it's not quite up to the minimum order value, I will then think, well, I can stick in a couple of tins or a couple of bags of pasta because I will need those eventually. And we know how that goes. We know, every listener to this podcast knows exactly how that goes. And so my stores of long-lasting food are out of control. But I end up having to keep getting bits and topping that up, even though it does not need topping up, to keep this fortnightly slot. Yet, every time I would think, okay, just cancel it and just, get a delivery when you need one, I would think, but what if there's another pandemic or there's another reason why it's impossible to book a slot? I will regret getting rid of my recurring slot. I need to keep the recurring slot because of that scarcity panic. And so that has been my weird dilemma for quite a while. And I'm happy to report that I have cancelled the recurring slot. And it is so nice the last month or two to just be getting a supermarket delivery when I need a supermarket delivery, rather than getting a supermarket delivery every 2 weeks just in case something monstrous happens and I can't book one. I really need to do some work on this scarcity panic. I'm aware that it's one of my biggest areas that keeps me hoarding, but I feel like this is a tiny success in that battle. So this week, I'm going to talk about a story I was thinking about. There's a story called The Hare and the Tortoise. That is one of a group of stories called Aesop's Fables. And Aesop's Fables was one of those books or series of stories that were read to me a lot when I was very little. And one of them, The Hare and the Tortoise, well, just have a listen.
The Hare and the Tortoise. A hare one day ridiculed the short feet and slow pace of the tortoise. The latter, laughing, said, "Though you be swift as the wind, I will beat you in a race." The hare, deeming her assertion to be simply impossible, assented to the proposal, and they agreed that the fox should choose the course and fix the goal. On the day appointed for the race, they started together. The tortoise never for a moment stopped, but went on with a slow but steady pace straight to the end of the course. The hare, trusting to his native swiftness, cared little about the race, and, lying down by the wayside, fell fast asleep. At last, waking up and moving as fast as he could, he saw the tortoise had reached the goal and was comfortably dozing after her fatigue. Perseverance is surer than swiftness. Section 9 of Aesop's Fables, a new revised version. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
So even as a young child, I was clearly very sceptical because I had issues with this story. And I think I was wrong. So I always thought that the tortoise didn't really win the race because he wasn't faster than the hare, essentially. The hare was faster. He wasn't better than the hare at racing. And that it wasn't a real test because the hare was daft. Basically, that's the only reason the tortoise won, was that the hare was daft. The tortoise won by chance. And that's what I always believed. But what I've come to understand about the world and about the hare and the tortoise is that the hare might have been fast, but the hare was complacent. And so the tortoise won because the hare was complacent, but also the tortoise won because the tortoise did the race best. The tortoise had the winning strategy and the winning approach. It wasn't chance. It was the tortoise won the race by skill, just not the obvious skill of moving really fast. I always thought the tortoise only won because the hare messed up. But in fact, the tortoise won because the tortoise was persistent and the tortoise was consistent and the tortoise kept going slowly, but got to the finish line before the hare. And that wasn't bad luck on the hare's side or good luck on the tortoise's side. It was a strategy to keep pushing through versus a strategy to assume you've already won and give up, or to push so hard at the start that you exhaust yourself and need to have a rest before you can finish. So the tortoise did have skills and talents. And even though the skills and talents were not speed, they won him the race because the skills and talents of keeping going at your own pace are winning skills and talents and strategies. So I'm going to talk today about the benefits of fast versus slow, because there are benefits to both. This is not going to be fast is always bad, slow is always good. There are benefits and drawbacks to both, and if we are aware of those, we can make the best choices or better choices when we're trying to work out what on earth we're doing with our homes. So let's look at being fast first. The benefits of working fast, dehoarding fast, are that you can get a lot done. You can get a lot done in a short space of time when you're fueled by adrenaline. And the benefit of that is that that's encouraging. When you can see a difference, that feels more encouraging than plugging away over a period of time and doing things gradually and not necessarily seeing dramatic change or any change that's that noticeable. Another benefit of doing things fast is when your circumstances demand fast action. If the landlord is about to do an inspection, if you have some kind of home emergency, it really helps if you can harness that speed, that rush, that adrenaline, that throw yourself into a task and do nothing else for a bit until things are improved. That kind of speed can be incredibly useful and valuable in those situations. To get a bit extra, you can become a dehoarding darling. Hear answers from interviewees and me to extra questions, get suggestions and recommendations, and get a Spotify playlist to dehoard to. You can also feel warm and glowy in the knowledge that you're helping to support the podcast. Find out everything you need to know at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. That's overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. And another time when fast can be good is if you get an inner urge to be fast, if you get a surge of adrenaline and sudden motivation and you just want to throw yourself into dehoarding for a whole afternoon and do nothing else until the urge passes. It can be really good, I think, to kind of ride that wave. We can't only ride that wave. We can't wait for inspiration to strike every time we do something, because that's not reliable and it's not consistent. But for myself, at least, I am a believer in when the urge comes, when that surge of energy or that surge of inspiration hits, I am a believer in going with it as much as I can, making the most of that sense of wanting to do it and do it now. The risks, though, of fast are you will burn out. Fast isn't sustainable over a long period of time. And that burning out might happen within a day, or it might take a week or a month. But if you're throwing everything into dehoarding, doing it every minute of every day, you just can't sustain that. And that's not because you're a failure or you're not good enough or you're not trying hard enough. It's just human. It's just human. We can't sustain that in the long term. And the thing with dehoarding every minute of every day is it's also not practical in the real world, because most of us have jobs or families or friends or commitments. But even if you don't have to get back to a job or your family, you just mentally and physically can't sustain it. Not because you're lacking, just because nobody can. And when you burn out, you might put yourself off doing it at all for a while. You know, like, apparently this is something that some people do and some people don't. I am one of these people who does. When you get really into a certain food and you eat nothing but that food for ages, and then all of a sudden, often overnight, you cannot face that food again for a year, and you don't quite know what happened, but you know that you cannot eat another tub of yogurt, or you know that you cannot eat another corn sausage, or whatever it is that you've been obsessed with. And you don't want to get into a place with dehoarding where you've pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed to be fast and fast and fast for ages, or not for ages, and suddenly you overnight put yourself off doing any of it at all. That's not where you want to be. So fast has its place, definitely, when you get the urge or when circumstances demand it. And the benefits of fast have their place. But I'm going to talk about slow now, working slowly and steadily like the tortoise. A real benefit of working slow and steady when you are dehoarding is that it is more sustainable in the long term. And with a big task like dehoarding an entire hoarded home, you need more paced, consistent action than you do spurts of sudden action. In addition to that, if we get to a point where we live in a home that is not hoarded, we need to maintain that, and that also takes sustained action if we're not going to backslide back into living in unmanageable surroundings. And so if we can learn how to deal with our home sustainably while dehoarding, we have a higher chance of keeping that up, of sustaining that, if we get to a point where our home is dehoarded and we're just trying to maintain a normal looking home, whatever that is. Another benefit of slow is not just that it's sustainable in the sense that you're less likely to burn out, but also it helps us to learn how to make habits or new behaviors stick. It helps us to turn them from something we do once in a while to something we do by default, whether that's taking the rubbish out, whether that's washing your dishes, whether it's putting things away, whether it's getting rid of something when you buy something new. When we do things slowly and gradually and steadily, they can become habits. I did an episode with Dr. Jan Eppingstall that I will link to in the show notes at Overcome Compulsive Hoarding about tiny habits and creating tiny habits and micro movements. And a lot of this kind of slow, sustainable work is a series of tiny habits that we are trying to develop, whether that's whenever you leave a room, you always take something with you that belongs in another room. Whenever you leave the house, you always take a rubbish bag with you. Whenever you A, you always do B. When you wake up, you do this. Before you go to bed, you do that. When we can make something habitual in a way that is sustainable, that's kind of the apex, isn't it? That's the winning combination. And slow and steady, by dint of the way human brains work, is the way to be habitual about something rather than do it for a bit and stop. And because we're less likely to burn out like we would if we were throwing ourselves all in all day, every day, we're less likely to put ourselves off. We're less likely to get to a point where we say, I cannot do another thing. Now that may still happen, but it will be less dramatic, less sudden, and more fleeting, because we are learning to establish that it's not all horror. It's a series of lots and lots and lots of small behavior changes, thinking changes, habits, things to do, things to not do. And we can hold on to what we learn and pick back up even if we fall off. The risks of slow and steady work it can be a bit disheartening if we feel like we're plugging away all the time and not making a whole lot of change. It's harder to notice change visually when it's more gradual. And there are fewer of those dramatic moments where you leave a room and come back in and go, wow, this looks really different. This looks so much better. That does not happen as much as when you are working fast and furious. There are other ways to build in that sense of satisfaction, though. Things like being really focused in your slow and steady work, picking one task and sticking with it so that you can see more of a difference than if you do a little bit here and a little bit there. Doing things like taking photos before and after. And whereas if you're doing like a blitz task, that might be take a photo in the morning and take a photo in the evening to compare. With slow and steady work, it might be more like take a photo on a Monday and then another photo the next Sunday to compare. But that can help us see more objectively that we are still moving forward. We are still getting to where we want to be. It's just less dramatically than if we were flinging ourselves into it and working in a highly effective, marginally chaotic, very urgent, adrenaline-fueled way. So whereas working fast is best suited to emergency-type situations and riding the wave when you get the urge to throw yourself into it, the slow and steady work is more suited for a long-term plan. It's more suited for, I am sick of living like this and I want to improve my situation. Or it's more suited for, my children won't let my grandchildren visit me. If I keep plugging away at this, maybe they can come at New Year. It's more suited to, I'm ashamed by the way I live and I don't want to live like this anymore. Next summer, I am going to invite a friend over. And it's more suited also to no particular deadline, no particular target, just a more livable home where you're not tripping over things, where you're not stubbing your toe constantly, where you're not losing everything, where you're not having a heart attack when somebody knocks on the door, all of those things. Even if you don't have a by January this or by April that, even if you just have a I do not want to live like this approach, the progress that adds up is the slow and steady progress, because you're not shocking yourself and maybe slightly scaring yourself. And when you slightly scare yourself with fast action, which can happen if you make a lot of progress very quickly, it can feel amazing, but sometimes it can also feel a little bit panicky. And if our response to that kind of anxiety and that kind of panic is, oh, I'll feel safer if I'm surrounded by stuff, working slowly and steadily helps to avoid that, because your brain just has a chance to get used to each change before you move on to the next one. So it's not that working fast is bad and working slow is good. They have their own role. They both have their place. But in terms of long-term change, especially changing the behaviors and the thinking and the beliefs, the slow, steady tortoise action tends to be the kind that wins the race, while the fast, urgent hare action tends to be the one that wins for a bit and then falls asleep either through complacency or exhaustion or burnout, and before it knows it, the tortoise has won. So shout out to the Life Kit podcast, which I will link to in the show notes at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Every episode of the podcast has its own blog post where every link I mention is, and a transcript of the entire episode is there as well. So on this episode of the Life Kit podcast, guest Casey Davis, who you might remember from her episode on this podcast, is talking about reframing the way we think about care tasks. Have a listen to this.
I'm going to have that dinner party, but now I have all these dishes. All right, I did a project, but now I have to clean up after myself. I want to flip that. Instead of thinking that care tasks are always cleaning up after ourselves, I want to start thinking of them as forward-facing tasks. I'm going to clean for myself. I'm going to put 2 dishes into the dishwasher because it would be a real kindness to morning me to be able to just have a clean dish to eat off of in the morning. I want to put my slippers next to my bed at night because I have tile floors and my feet are cold in the morning. And what a kindness it would be to myself to be able to wake up and put those slippers on before having to walk across the tile. And when you start doing things out of kindness, things start to change. And sometimes I say, I'm not going to even touch these dishes because I deserve rest. And I do that out of kindness too. I'm going to go let myself lay down on the couch.
I'm going to put some of this stuff into action in my life. Seriously. It's one of those things that shifts your perspective.
Well, when you do, just remember that there's no way to fail at this. You do it and it makes your life better. And then maybe you fall off or you don't do it. And then you go, oh yeah, I want to go pick that tool up again.
Are you hearing the voice in my head or something?
I have the same voice. That's how I know.
I think that's really powerful when we stop thinking of these things as chores that we do resentfully and start thinking of them as a gift to our future self. That's got power as a message. It's got power. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to that Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on board. You can find all the links I've mentioned and a transcript of the episode online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to the podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes. There may be links in this podcast that earn me money. This doesn't come at any extra cost to you if you make a purchase through those links, and it helps to support the podcast. So buckle up, let's do this. I've got that cringe.